Welcome to Rasmus and Friends, Stories Behind the Science, hosted by Rasmus, the leading clinical platform for ABA therapy. Each episode highlights inspiring stories from experts and individuals with unique perspectives. Join us as we explore valuable insights and foster empowerment within the autism community. Hello, and welcome back to Rasmus and Friends. I'm your host, Amy Cook, and I'm excited to introduce today's guest, author, photographer, autism advocate, and mother to 3 beautiful children, Eileen Lamb. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. How's it going today, Eileen?
It's going well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. So go ahead and tell us a little bit more about yourself, your family, and your career.
Yes, so my name is Eileen Lamb. I was born and raised in France, but I live in Austin, Texas now. I have 3 children, 2 who are on the spectrum. One of them is diagnosed with level 3 autism. His name is Charlie. He's 11. And my other son is Jude. He's 9 now and diagnosed with level 1 autism. And then I have a little toddler who's just about to be 2 years old. For work, I'm the director of social media at Autism Speaks. And on the side, I'm also a published author, photographer, and content creator. I have my own social media platforms under the Autism Cafe.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So I was curious, what brought you to the United States from France?
I have always wanted to come to the United States. Like it's been a dream since I was a child, seeing those American TV shows on TV and the yellow school bus and the lockers in the hallways, like all of these things that to you living in America are probably like just so normal and you don't even pay attention to them anymore. But to a lot of French people, at least to me, it just, I don't know, there was something so amazing. It's like the American dream. And the only way to go to the United States legally for me was to become an au pair, which is like a nanny. I was basically taking care of a little child, a little toddler who was 2 years old at the time. And yeah, that's how I came to the United States. I loved it instantly, honestly. It was just like love at first sight. Then I met my husband, and the rest is history, as they say.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's talk more about your family. So, how many years apart are Jude and Charlie? And did you already know that Jude was on the spectrum when Charlie was born?
I learned Charlie was on the spectrum when I was like halfway through my pregnancy with Jude. Charlie was 2.5 when Jude was born, so they're about 2.5 years apart. And I always ask doctors at my pregnancy appointments, like, what's the risk of my second being on the spectrum too? And I got so many different answers. I think no one really knew. And Jude turned out to be on the spectrum too, but his struggles are so different from Charlie's.
Absolutely. So, I know that Charlie is the one that has profound autism. When did you first notice that his development was different?
Well, I was a first-time mom, so hindsight is 2020. Like looking back now, there were signs from very early on, but when I first noticed it back then was around 18 months
Mhm.
because I was part of a Facebook group with moms who all had babies in the spring of 2013. And each week we had a brag thread, which basically was, you know, just moms being moms and sharing like new things their babies, toddlers were doing. And I just couldn't relate. I couldn't participate in that thread anymore. Like the babies were like clapping and like singing and talking. And it's like, well, Charlie doesn't do any of these things. And people were telling me, you know, he's probably just taking his time. All babies develop at their own pace. And he's learning 2 languages because, of course, I was speaking French to him. But I just had a feeling in my gut that something wasn't right because he had a regression, I would say. He had like 12, a dozen of words, and then he lost them right around like 18, 20 months, 18 months. And he started being in his own world, like to an extent that all he would do all day was line up his toy cars. He
Mm-hmm.
was like very rigid. If like you move one car out of the line, it was like an hour long meltdown, and he just didn't interact with other children. He did so many meltdowns and temper tantrums, and I just knew, even though I was a first time mom, I think that's when I knew something wasn't right. So a mom in that group actually recommended I take DM chat, which is available on the Autism Speaks website, actually. And any score above 3 out of 20 question is a risk for autism, and Charlie scored 18. So we're like, okay, yeah, something is definitely going on. And from then he qualified for speech, OT, basically everything they had to offer.
Okay. Can you think about a time when you wished, like more than ever, that Charlie could talk potentially and he was sick or an emotion or something where you just wanted to get those words out of him?
Yeah, sickness for sure. I would say, like again, a few years ago, he started limping and the limp wouldn't go away, but he couldn't even point to where he was hurting. But because he was limping, we knew something was hurt. So they had to do like, it was over 30 x-rays of his lower body to find what
Wow.
was going on, which ended up being a fracture. But he couldn't even tell me where he was hurting, right? Another time, it was even scarier. He ended up in the ICU. He was losing consciousness. His blood pressure was low. His heart rate was low, which apparently is a very unusual finding because usually when one is low, the other one is high. But anyway, he was in the ICU and it couldn't tell us anything, which would have provided the doctors with so much information to like diagnose and treat. Thankfully, after a couple of days in the ICU, we ended up like back to normal, but we never really found out what happened.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, in case any of our viewers don't know, I know you're pretty open on social media, but you also have autism level 1, so it looks very different. But after finding out that both you and Jude were also on the spectrum, did it surprise you or close family members on how different autism can look?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, without naming family members, I mean, some of them will say that, well, how can you, Jude and Charlie, be autistic? Because Charlie's autism is so obvious. Like even someone who doesn't know anything about autism, spends 10 seconds with Charlie, you see something is different. You can spend a day with me and Jude, and I will say you might not see it unless you're trained to look at, subtle signs. So it's definitely yeah, I get that a lot, not just from family members. And, part of it is that Jude and I, we would have been diagnosed with Asperger syndrome if it had been before the change in the DSM. And I think personally that it was a great thing to have that distinction because that way I can say, hey, I have Asperger's
Mm-hmm.
instead of saying I have autism, which can be confusing.
Yes, and you often don't hear, you're now starting to hear profound autism more, but you often don't hear people saying, the level 1, 2, or 3 unless they're kind of in that clinical setting. So absolutely. Okay, well, now let's talk about the Autism Cafe blog and your Instagram following. So when and why did you start the blog Autism Cafe?
The main reason was so I didn't even want to start it at first. That's really funny, is that I just started sharing on my personal Facebook page about Charlie's autism to educate people in France and share with my friends, like just on my private Facebook profile, right? And then people started really being interested in my content within that close circle, and someone asked me to make my post shareable. And I did, and it kind of like went viral. And from then, people wanted to hear more. So I started a Facebook page, named it the Autism Cafe, and it kind of snowballed from there. But I think what really pushed me to create that page was one event, was a Halloween party at Charlie's ABA Therapy Center. And we went there, and I was like looking forward to connecting with parents living through similar things, right? I wanted people I could relate to. And even then, I mean, it goes back to what we were just talking about. I just couldn't relate to those other parents and their autistic children. Very nice people, right? But very different struggles because, again, Charlie's autism is so severe. And in a way, it made me feel worse. You know, it's like, well, we have the same diagnosis, but our struggles are so different. And, you know, again, it's been 10 years now, so I've learned a lot. But at the time, I really wanted to find my people, I think.
Yes, awesome. Absolutely. So, what have been some of the most memorable responses you've received from readers or anyone that you've connected to? It could be just a comment or it could be a person.
I mean, the most powerful comments I receive is when, you know, people tell me that my content makes them feel less alone. I've had some very powerful messages from people saying like they wanted to end their life,
Oh,
saying that after reading my blogs, they found hope and they realized that they were not alone. And like, wow, you know, it's a very sad but powerful at the same time. And, you know, I get a lot of hate on social media
mm,
and remembering those moments that some people might not be commenting these things publicly, but I'm still making a difference in the lives of people, and that that really touches me and pushes me to keep advocating.
absolutely. Well, and your photography is just stunning. It's truly, your whole page is just beautiful. The images are all so warm and authentic, and it's just a beautiful page to look at for sure.
Thank
So
you.
we'll include some of that in the show notes too, so people can check it out if they haven't already. But yeah, okay. I'd like to talk about ABA therapy. Speaking of, I know some hot topics sometimes, but how did you first find out about ABA therapy and what were your initial thoughts?
Well, the first time ever hearing it was right after Charlie was diagnosed from the developmental pediatrician. They
Mm-hmm.
recommended 25 hours of ABA therapy. I had never heard of it. You know, it was all like printed on a piece of paper. That was it. So what did I do? Went off to Google. Really, really, really bad idea. I started reading. It was like uh, torture, abuse, dog training, and I was like, whoa, okay. But you know, I'm not the type of person to, you know, take what I read on Google at face value, and I like to see for myself, right? So, you know, I made a lot of phone calls to some like doctors, ABS centers. We visited a lot of places. And at first, you know, I still had some anxiety when Charlie started because of everything I had read, right? It was still in the back of my mind. So I made sure to stay there for the first sessions. We did in-home ABA for 4 years,
Mhm.
actually, before switching to center only. And yeah, that was it.
Awesome. Very cool. So I want to discuss your role with Autism Speaks. So what is your current, or tell us about the role and what's your current job title with them?
I'm the director of social media and social influencer marketing at Autism Speaks. You know, the mission here is to share stories of people all across the spectrum. And that includes people like me, people like my son, Charlie. We really want to, you know, be the place people go to find accurate information. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And yeah, my job is just finding those stories, telling powerful stories, and sharing the right information on social media.
Okay. So if my research is correct, I think you've been with them, is it 3 years? Is that correct?
Yep, just about. Yeah.
Just about 3 years. So kind of thinking back on the front end when either they first approached you or you approached them, were you nervous or hesitant at all to accept your first role with Autism Speaks, or were you on board kind of from day one?
Well, right before I started working with them, I had done some volunteering and work
Okay.
behind the scenes. By that time, I was pretty confident. Like I wanted to get involved and be part of the mission. But before then, before I started doing some things, I did a podcast with them. That was called
Mhm.
Adulting on the Spectrum, where we only interviewed autistic adults. And, you know, I learned a lot being from the inside. I was really nervous before that because of everything I had read
Mhm.
on social media. But same thing as ABA, I really like to figure these things out, you know, from my personal experience rather than he says, she said, and yeah.
Awesome. Very good. So I know the organization has evolved tremendously over the last decade, and they've even updated their mission statement years ago. So have you noticed any more recent changes or like the direction the organization is going?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest difference is how upfront we are about everything we stand for, and we've been really out there with addressing misinformation and disinformation about the organization, which I think is so important for people who, might not have the opportunity like me to be on the inside and see for themselves that Autism Speaks is doing great work. So yeah, I think a big difference is that we're putting the right information out there. We're working with so many autistic people. It's a criticism that you'll hear a lot about the organization, that they don't give a voice to autistic people. And I can tell you that in everything we do, there is at least one autistic person involved in every project, on the
Awesome.
board, of course, in the organization. And like I said, every little project we do on the side too.
Very cool. So some of our listeners may not know that the feedback you receive isn't always positive. You kind of shared that a little bit earlier. While a lot of the comments are encouraging, there's also a noticeable divide, I would say, within the autism community in general, and on the comments on some of your posts. What do you think is the root cause of this divide?
Well, first of all, I think the fact that the autism diagnosis is too broad is contributing to this divide, because you have people who have level 1 autism like me trying to speak on behalf of those like my eldest son Charlie, and it just doesn't work because even though we share a diagnosis, the struggles are so different. So
Mhm.
it doesn't really work to have like one group of people trying to advocate for the entire community, but also, in a way, a lot of these people who have level 1 autism, again, I don't want to target anyone, but by definition, they're the ones who are able to self-advocate on social media, and often they push out people with higher support needs, like Charlie. So I will say a big part of the divide is due to that diagnosis being a bit too broad. Again, that's a personal opinion. It's not speaking on behalf of the community. That's something, like I just said, that really bothers me when people try to speak on behalf of the entire community. So I'm just sharing my opinion as one
Mhm.
mother of two autistic people and as someone who's on the spectrum. I also think that there is some people see their autism as a disability and others don't, which again, I would say comes from the fact that the diagnosis is too broad. So a lot of opinions, and you're bound to have discord. But I do wish the discord and disagreement in the community could be respectful, because there
Absolutely.
is a lot that is unacceptable.
Yes. And how do you handle all the negative feedback? Like, what keeps you going? Are there days where you just want to shut it down and say, I'm done with this?
It used to affect me a lot more at the beginning, but over the years, you just like grow thicker skin and
Uh-huh.
just get used to it and push through it. But like I was saying earlier, just knowing that even if people don't say it publicly, I know that I'm helping people, and if my content can help like one person in the back that's been really struggling, and then it's worth it.
Awesome. And so, for everybody that is involved in the autism community, how do you think individuals can help unite one another and kind of bring everyone together, and not have such a divide?
Well, I think something people can do is what I just did. Remember that your opinion is only your opinion as one person on the spectrum, as one parent, and differences are okay, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, we should be able to accept that, maybe someone doesn't like the puzzle piece, but maybe the other person does. Maybe someone likes the color blue for themselves to represent autism. Someone likes the color red. And those differences are okay. Don't try and push your opinion on others, because autistic people are not a monolith. Like, we're not gonna all have the same opinions. And you shouldn't be trying to speak on behalf of everybody. So just respect differences.
Absolutely. So I'm really excited to hear about your latest book. So tell us a little bit more about it and how it's different from some of your previous books.
Well, my first book was called what was my first book called? Autism, All Across the Spectrum. Wow, I can't believe I blanked on the name of my own book. It was called All Across the Spectrum, and it was a book about autism and actually my journey to discovering I was on the spectrum after my son Charlie was diagnosed. And that was a picture book. It had pictures in it because, like I mentioned, I do some photography. I was very like an autobiography, self-help autism book, so very autism focused. When my latest two books are more self-prose poetry, I would call it. So it's not built, it's a nonfiction again, but not built on a personal experience.
Okay. So what inspired you to write and yet here you are, and what are you hoping readers take away from it?
There has been so many, I would say, struggles in my life, just like other people. And one thing that really helped me through all of it is writing and reading too. And in one of my darkest times, I read some books just like this. Again, they're called self-prose poetry books, and it helped me so much. Again, I felt like I wasn't alone. I felt like there was a light at the end of the tunnel. I feel like people don't really share those vulnerable parts of themselves and all of the things that we all go through, but we keep inside. I don't know if it's because we're ashamed or if it's frowned upon to be vulnerable, but I really wanted to be vulnerable and talk about these things. Not a lot of people talk about to hopefully help others, like I've been helped in the same way with those books.
Awesome. So I recently saw the film Who Speaks for Charlie is eligible for an Oscar, and that's pretty exciting. So tell us more about that film.
Yeah, a few years ago, a couple of years ago, a filmmaker reached out to me. He had seen the bullying, let's call it what it is, I go through on social media and got really interested in my story and Charlie's story. And I came to Austin, after we had a few phone calls and met that documentary that shows, I would say it does a great job at showing the contrast within the spectrum.
Hmm.
And it, raises the question, what happens after I'm gone? Like when you have a child with level 3 profound autism, there are a lot of questions we don't have answers to right now. I think it's a beautiful film, not very objective, but I'm excited for it to come out.
Yes. So that was going to be my next question. Where can people view the film? I did see it's going to be in Dallas. It looks like next week, but where else or how can people access it?
So it's going to be on YouTube before the end of the year. Right now, it's only at film festivals. I think we still have El Paso and Dallas film showing. But if you're not local, give it a couple months and it will be available online.
Very exciting. So where can people find more information about your other work, books, website, social media, if you want to share some of that, and then I'll also put it in the show notes.
Yeah, you can find me on social media at the Autism Cafe on Instagram and Facebook. And I'm Eileen.lam on TikTok. My website is theautismcafe.com. And my books are All Across the Spectrum, which is the one about autism. And then my second book is Be the One. And the third is And Yet Here You Are, which is available for pre-order right now.
Awesome. So what advice would you give to new parents that might be listening that just received an autism diagnosis for their child?
Don't go on social media too much. I know it's tempting. Maybe like give yourself some time before going there, unless you're going to be able to, take what you need from it and leave behind what you don't need, because it can be so overwhelming. Like we just talked about in this episode, there is so much conflicting advice. And oftentimes, you're going to be the best person to know good for your child. Try things out for yourself, because you won't know what works for your child and your family until you try it yourself. It doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. You've tried, right? But just find out for yourself. Do not take what you read on social media like, it's necessarily the truth. There is a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and what works for one person might not work for the other, and vice versa.
Great, thanks for sharing that. So the slogan for Hirasmus is focus on the child in front of you. We provide the best clinical platform so providers can focus on what truly matters. On this podcast, we like to close by asking our guests to reflect on their own children or the children closest to them and share advice on how they maintain the focus in the busy world we live in. So I'd like you to think about each one of your beautiful children and share how you keep the focus on them. And I understand it might vary from kiddo to kiddo, but how do you keep the focus on the children in front of you?
And that's something I speak about on my social media channels, how it's so important to spend quality time with each child and focus on what each child, likes and doesn't like independently. Like for Charlie, I know if I want to make him happy, I'm gonna go to the pool with him or to the park. Or I'm just gonna like sit with him while he does some steaming with whatever is around him. Charlie, my goal for him is that I want him to be safe and happy. Then for Jude, I know that I need to keep him very active and challenged to keep him happy. He loves chess and soccer. He needs a lot of help regulating his emotions and can get very dysregulated with minor changes. So, give him plenty of love and patience. That's very important when I'm around Jude. And with my toddler Billy, I mean, she's 2 right now. She's at the edge where everything is both exciting and scary. So we're just trying it out and figuring out as we go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story. We just appreciate it so much. And remember, in the midst of everything, it's the child in front of you that truly matters. Until next time, stay focused and take care. Thanks for joining us on Hirasmus and Friends, Stories Behind the Science. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us continue to share inspiring stories and foster empowerment within the autism community. See you next time.